So I was working on a video about the autobiographies of the 4 original KISS members when Paul Stanley dropped this. There is a big difference between teaching acceptance and normalizing and even encouraging participation in a lifestyle that confuses young children into questioning their sexual identification as though some sort of game, and then parents in some cases allow it. There are individuals who as adults may decide reassignment is their needed choice, but turning this into a game or parents normalizing it as some sort of natural alternative or believing that because a little boy likes to play dress up in his sister's clothes or a girl in brothers, we should lead them steps further down a path that's far from the innocence of what they are doing. With many children who have no real sense of sexuality or sexual experiences caught up in the fun of using pronouns and saying what they identify as, some adults mistakenly confuse teaching acceptance with normalizing and encouraging a situation that has been a struggle for those truly affected and have turned it into a sad and dangerous fad. A few days later, Paul did offer a follow-up that read, "While my thoughts were clear, my words clearly were not. Most importantly, and above all else, I support those struggling with their sexual identity while enduring constant hostility and those whose path leads them to reassignment surgery. It's hard to fathom the kind of conviction that one must feel to take those steps. A paragraph or two will remain far too short to fully convey my thoughts or point of view, so I will leave that for another time and place." So here's the thing. I am not making a video to cancel Paul Stanley, or to call him a transphobe. I do appreciate that he walked it back a little bit, and admitted that social media wasn't the time or place for this. I do believe that he believes what he said in the first post, but it is worth noting that no, I don't think he actively hates the trans community. The thing is, you don't have to be a massively hostile bigot to be transphobic. You can be racist without being a member of the KKK. And I do think some of Paul's post is transphobic. I don't want to be a KISS drama channel. Heck, I don't want to be a KISS channel. I ignore most of what goes on, such as Paul and Ace Frehley's recent immature feud, but I think it is important to say something about this because Paul is a pretty famous person with a lot of followers and a decent amount of influence. The most? No, but still. And what he said is potentially harmful. If you don't know what any of this is about, over the last few years, a number of states in the US have been restricting or outright banning gender affirmation care for transgender youth. There were recently protests in the Texas Capitol over this exact issue. Florida Governor Ron DeSantis said in a news conference last August, "You don't disfigure 10, 12, 13-year-old kids based on gender dysphoria." This is at the heart of the issue. Protect the children, blah, blah, blah. I've heard it. What is gender dysphoria? It is distress caused when gender identity doesn't match a person's assigned sex. A Washington Post article reads, "Gender dysphoria can have serious health impacts. It can affect a person's ability to function at school or work and can lead to intense anxiety, depression, and suicide risk. Some adolescents or adults have experienced distress using the bathroom and developed gastrointestinal issues as a result," said Jack Turbin, a doctor and fellow in child and adolescent psychiatry at Stanford University School of Medicine. "Some transgender people who bind their chest have experienced skin infections and respiratory problems," Turbin said. "These laws are all about punishing kids with gender dysphoria, with the reasoning being that kids are too young to understand their own identity and are making life-changing decisions." Which, if you don't think about it at all, there's kind of a valid point there that I think most people would agree with. Invasive surgery should not be performed on 10-year-olds. Here's the thing, though. That doesn't happen. That's not how this works. How would reassignment surgery even happen on a 10-year-old? Who's doing this? Cite your sources, DeSantis. PBS has a very informative article on what gender-affirming care is and how it works. When dealing with children, they first have to be diagnosed with gender dysphoria. After meeting a certain criteria and guidelines, trans youth will be given puberty blockers. These are not administered until a child first shows signs of puberty. Before that, the care is all socially based. Changing clothes, hairstyles, pronouns. At its most extreme, legally changing a name. Puberty blockers do exactly what it sounds like they do. Blocks the brain from releasing specific hormones involved in puberty. This is the age range that DeSantis and others are so concerned about. And guess what? Puberty blockers are totally reversible. Puberty resumes as normal when you stop taking them. If there is a problem or a person feels differently as they get older, they can just stop. The purpose of this is to give trans kids more time without the pressure and stress of physically developing traits of a gender they don't identify themselves as. The next step is taking hormones, estrogen and testosterone. This will happen at an age that someone is mature enough to make informed medical decisions. This is usually around 16, but will often still require parental consent. And then there's gender reassignment surgery, which generally is recommended that the procedure is not performed until you're 18, though I think it can and does happen to people slightly younger. But certainly not 12-year-olds, and these laws are not just about preventing surgery on kids. A lot of them are also banning hormones and even the puberty blockers. This is not about protecting children. This is fear-mongering about a non-existent issue to scare voters. The right has decided that this is the hill they're going to die on right now, and I imagine it will be a major factor in next year's presidential election. Like with abortion, some of this is to appeal to right-wing evangelicals and religious groups, people who use their religion as an excuse to hate and discriminate. Very similar to how much of Donald Trump's 2016 presidential election was based around his dumbass wall, exploiting people's prejudices and fear to get them to vote. As well as playing into this culture war thing that's been going on, this appeals to the anti-woke crowd who want to stick it to the libs. It's all such a load. What are trans people doing to you? They're just people trying to live their lives. They're a peaceful community while also being 4 times more likely to be victims of violence than cisgender people. People have found excuses for their prejudice, whether it was J.K. Rowling's nonsense about trans people would use bathrooms to rape people, or that trans kids have an inherent edge in sports. That second one really makes me laugh because it's not really true, but also I just imagine that some Republican's kid lost like a soccer match to a trans kid and it just burns them up. Maybe little Timmy just sucks at soccer, dude. Also, who cares? This is such a non-issue. This think of the children ideology is just the latest version of that. People who need to mind their own business, trying to govern how others live their lives. Circling back to Paul and his post, his fears and concerns are not warranted. Being trans is not some cool hip fad the kids are doing. It's not a TikTok dance. Like, they're not handing out puberty blockers to any kid that wants to use different pronouns. This is serious stuff taken seriously by medical professionals. Also, we talked about kids being too young to understand sexuality, and I guess I can see where that would be confusing considering that the trans community is included in the LGBTQ community, but being trans isn't a sexual thing. It's about gender identity. A kid who is suffering from gender dysphoria isn't really thinking about sexuality. Again, I think Paul means well. Or maybe that's just what I want to tell myself because I've been such a huge fan of his my whole life. And if he feels he didn't make his point clearly, fair enough. I'm not in his head. I can't tell you what he means or feels. But the words he chose to use carry a lot of negative weight and lend credence to rhetoric that is based in hate and discrimination. Rolling Stone posted a pretty damning article that was just showing who supported Paul in his initial message, and it was all alt-right conspiracy nut jobs. That has to tell you all you need to know. I genuinely believe most people are good-hearted and don't have a problem with the trans community, but are being misled by misinformation meant to scare them. I hope Paul and anyone with a similar mindset will take this as an opportunity to do more research. I'm including links in the description to everything I looked at for this video, and I highly encourage you to read this stuff. Paul's follow-up post was a lot more mature than most people in similar situations have done. He could have pulled J.K. Rowling, doubled down, and made it his whole personality as she did. I think there's a real opportunity here for growth and understanding. I don't really have a good conclusion, but that's what I had to say. I think this is an important issue that's only going to get more intense and potentially worse over the course of the next year. This is not an issue that affects me directly in any way other than basic compassion for other people. Sorry little Timmy is so bad at sports, Ron.